Well, it's 12:05, so we would like to welcome you all. We're going to begin this webinar today. Thank you for joining us for the topic of discovering your identity made in the image of God. And honestly, this is the basis and foundation of it all. We want to welcome Father Peter Wingerter. I said that right this time, yeah?
You did. Good job.
Perfect. So I'll give a short introduction. So Father Peter's been married to Sarah for 23 years and is blessed with 7 children. He served in the Air Force for 20 years and was ordained a Melkite Catholic priest in September of 2022. He graduated from Franciscan University's Clinical Mental Health Counseling program and recently moved to Texas to serve the Melkite Catholic community in Dallas-Fort Worth. He's also working as a counselor with Rejoice Counseling. So welcome, Father Peter.
Thank you very much. I appreciate being here.
Which parishes are you at in DFW area, or what area of DFW are you in?
So my Melkite parish is in the Fort Worth area. It's northwest. Whoever's familiar with this area would be in Watauga. So that's
Okay.
where it's a parish. It is it's a rented space in a strip mall, to be honest with you. So we are
Yeah.
doing what we can as this community gets bigger. And then the hope and the intention, God willing, is that we build a church here in the near future.
Beautiful. Beautiful. Yep. Little by little.
Amen.
Well, today we're here to talk about being made in the image and likeness of God and discovering our true identities. We were brainstorming this topic and really felt that it was fundamental, right? Um, could you give us some examples of people who may make being made in the image of God, or make that clear to us? Some examples
Mhm.
of that? I don't know.
Yeah, sure. So, you're made in the image of God. I'm made in the image of God. Everybody who's dialed in is made in the image of God, right? And I think if people don't understand that fundamental, we were all created in the image of God, we can really get skewed of who we are as a person and then our identity and what does that mean with likeness of God, which we can take later. But we are all made in the image of God. So if you've ever come across people asking the question, which I certainly have, like, that person was just born evil, or like, was that person born evil? Like, and there are these
Mhm.
questions. The answer is always, always, according to the Christian perspective, we were always born good. Every single person is created in the image of God. That can get, more technical with theology and stuff like that, but I mean, that's it. But a couple of examples that I like to use, just even saying like we're all born in the image of God, is even and what that means, because we're all sinners. We can look at the examples of like Saints Peter and Judas. Both were made in the image of God. Both did in many ways the same sin. They apostatized. I denied God, right? And one then eventually had that repentance. He knew he made a mistake. He loved, and he had a huge conversion. That's Peter, right? He ran back to the image in who he was made in, God. And then you had Judas who despaired and went off and he killed himself. Um, so there's that, both in the image of God, but how they took that after they had a major fall was completely different. And then I still get to it later, but I can talk about it now. That's fundamentally different to the likeness of God, because we all know we're made in the image and likeness. Likeness is how much we're living that image out, if you will, right?
Oh, great distinction.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay.
So the more that's obscured, the more that I'm not living out the image of God, then my likeness to Him becomes less and less. Can never be completely taken away,
Yeah.
but it can very much be like I don't even see it really much anymore. But the distinction there, we had those two apostles and who went out and did something very different, and one obscured that likeness to such a degree that he even like despaired of all life, and he took his own life. Peter obscured it with his apostasy as well, but then he had that beautiful repentance, and then he was restored by Christ on the seashore, and then essentially put in charge of his church here on earth.
Wow. That is such a I'm glad that you started off with this example because yeah, we all have this essential dignity, but we're also free human beings and we can choose to move towards God or away from God.
Yeah.
Yeah. Wow.
And that's actually, that freedom is a reflection of being made in the image of God. right? Like, is because we have that same freedom that excuse me, the freedom that God gave to all of us, which is different from the animals. That's how we share in God's same freedom he has within himself. If that makes sense. The animals don't have that, right? They're kind of
Right.
slaves to their passions. We are not, right? So
Yeah, because we're rational animals. They're not rational animals.
correct. Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. Anything else you want to say on that? Or any other
Now if you got more
examples you want to
questions.
give us? That's good.
Oh yeah, I do like, I love the saints. I mean, they're great, and someone the church puts them before us, to give us things to aspire to. So I tend to kind of like the saints. When we see their stories, it seems like they always had their act together. It's like, boy, yeah, I'd love to be that way, but take the first 20 years of my life, like kind of ignore that, from that point. So, but I like using saints who were made in the image of God, and they obscured the likeness quite a bit, but how they were restored in their likeness. There's an Eastern saint, Saint James the Faster. I think he lived in like the 6th century, 500, something like that. And he was a very profound ascetic, someone, the desert dweller, goes and purposely gives up the comforts of the world for the purpose of growing closer to God. And he was known as a wonder worker. So miracles were done through him. And one time, so he's a very holy man,
Mhm.
right? And we would say he should have known better. Like he knew what he was doing. Kind of like the apostles that I mentioned, Peter and Judas. But this man, a young maiden, came to him to be healed. He was known for his miracle working, and he ended up falling with her sexually. And if that wasn't bad enough, he was so ashamed that he killed her, so his sin wouldn't be found out. Yeah, and this is a saint. Yeah, so he did these things, right? And then then he recognized what he did, and so the demons overcame him in those instances. And okay, I got to leave the stop being a monk is what his thing, and he was going back to the world at some point. I believe this is part of his story. And he was challenged on his way there, basically, no, go back and go back to the life that God had called you to. So James then goes back and he continues to repent, and he recognizes his sin, and he does what he can do to the best of his ability for the love of God. That's the big thing. It's for the love of God. This is why I'm doing this. I recognize my sin, not out of anxiety. And that's a huge. We can get into that later, but that's a huge thing. Like he again, he repented so much so, and he started living that life that God granted him to continue to do miracles again after that point. And Saint James the Faster, that's what's tagged onto the last part of his name, the Faster. Again, it just
Not the
things just
slower.
didn't. Yeah, not the haha, boom, boom. Uh, one who didn't eat so much, right?
Yeah, yeah,
But
yeah.
again, he again gave his life over again to that very severe, again done in a loving way, very severe form of life in repentance, but a desire to get closer to God. That God allowed him to do those wonder working miracles again. So I love those types of examples, right? We're all made in that image. We can get so down on ourselves with the sins that we live, like they're legitimate sins. Yeah, those are sins. But we never want to give up hope because we will always have that image that we're created with it. Thing to focus on is how much am I willing to start creating to get my likeness back to how it's supposed to be, like Saint James the Faster, like Saint Peter. So I guess that's probably all I have on that topic.
Yeah, that's pretty amazing because it would be so tempting to despair and just think like to forget, not be able to forgive yourself, right? Oftentimes we work with people who've made mistakes in our lives, who've, done
Right.
things like an abortion or
Yeah.
another sin
Yeah.
that they feel that they can't forgive themselves for. And like being able to let God's mercy enter is really a big deal. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think the fundamental problem with that, with those, in those situations. So again, yes, like if abortion, like all sorts of things. I don't want to pick just on that, but yes,
Yeah.
the problem is we start to look too much at ourselves, right? That's what Judas did. I should not have betrayed him. And the priest said, "Look to it yourself." So he did. What he did, he went and killed himself. Rather, if he would have been like Peter, "I'm sorry, Lord," which takes us out of ourselves, right? And I get it, like that's not easy, especially when we've committed like a real heinous act. Anyway, that is like we want to hold on to that, but as Christians, that's our life, is to be letting go of those sins, because we can only hold on to one thing at a time, right? It's either going to be Christ, the world, or the devil, essentially, the flesh, the devil. Um, right. So that's what it is. So that's pointing out here, that's a lot of the problems that we won't let go. Well, again, that's the point. Well, so when you won't let go, that means you're refusing to hold on to Christ to be restored. So that's what I try to work with clients on, just an awareness of like, well, you're holding on to this when God is asking you not to.
Mhm. Yeah, it's a great reflection of turning your gaze towards our Lord instead of
Mm,
looking inward so much. Yeah, that's
yeah.
beautiful. And so there are some people, like I would say that all of us probably are at some level of not comprehending that we are made in God's image,
Mm.
right? But are there what are we talking about when we're saying that maybe we don't understand who we are, what our identity is, that we're made in the image of God?
Okay. Yeah. So what does the image of God mean? That's kind of the question here, is what I'm understanding.
Mhm.
Humans in a specific way, we talk about rational, we can use that. We're specifically created to mirror God's nature, which is different from his essence. And so what does that mean? It means we all have the capacity for love, goodness, for our own creativity. That reflects who God is in his nature. Again, we can look at the animals, we can look at all creation, and they reflect some of that. That's true. But humans were given an even greater capacity. Animals can't love in the way we do. We see like two kittens snuggling. Oh, look, they love each other. And not exactly, actually. Hey, that beautiful flower is good in and of itself. Yes, but humans can reflect that goodness in and of itself. So, like, that's what it means. We will always have that capacity, right? So we might say, I don't feel like I love. I don't feel like I'm reflecting goodness, but feelings can get very tricky. And I would like to say, hey, be careful of that. Again, maybe a topic for another time, but we all have that capacity within us. And so with that, every human person has that inherent dignity. The churches often talk about, no matter how greatly they have sinned, which is why the church has progressively become more like the death penalty is not okay, right? That was one of the most recent changes of the catechism, a number of years ago. But it's like we are at a point in human history that we can preserve a human life still. We can always hope and we pray for their conversion, but we don't have to take that life anymore, right? And we shouldn't, because they were made in the image of God. We don't have that right. 1,000 years ago, we didn't have quite the capacity to protect the rest of society, but now we do. So that's why we would call that a progress in theology, in the life. And so now the church is very big on that. Like, we're not for the death penalty. They did this horrendous thing. I get it, and it's true. They did a horrendous thing, but it is still up to God to take their life, not us, because we see God in them, and God will always be in that person. The likeness
Mhm.
again is obscured, but yeah,
Mhm.
if that makes sense.
Yeah, yeah. So let's talk about what is identity? We're gonna
Identity.
talk a
Okay.
little bit about that. Yeah, what does that
Yeah.
mean?
Okay, an identity versus made in the image and likeness. So we hear people today say, let's talk the gender ideology. I identify, even if I was born a male, I identify with being a female. And so parents don't know what to do with this sometimes. They want to be a supportive parent. So, like, okay, identify. So, but what is identity? It's like identity you can probably get different perspectives on that. I'm sure you can. But this is what I would say identity is: it's what you actually believe about yourself, what you think you are, which is very different from what you are. You are made in the image of and likeness of God. That's a fact. As a theologue, like, we would always believe that. Now, if you, Liz, are saying, but I'm a male, that is not a fact. But you identify with that. It's because what you believe about that. And that is essentially where our culture is going. Like, if you believe it, then it's true. But we're not
Mhm.
rationalists. We don't go that way. But again, I identify with this or that thing doesn't mean that's the truth, but it's what we believe ourselves. And again, it's fundamentally different from who the person actually is, the essence, um, which means we can have a false identity, and that's what we
Mm.
see a lot in the practice, right? Like, I believe something false about myself. For those who are familiar with more of the counseling things like core belief with CBT, I mean that's what
Yeah.
that tries to get at, like that a core belief, something I believe fundamentally about myself. Well, we got to look at that as a therapist or with our clients and say, okay, but you know what? We try to highlight to them, but that's a false belief, right?
Mhm.
It just is. Um, they think about this. Something to pay attention to with our identity. It's actually that is what motivates what we do as well. So if I believe that I'm worthless, I'm going to start acting like I'm worthless. Like it, we can see this very much, sadly so, in the people who have been sexually abused. Like I'm not worth it. People should just be able to do that to me. And then they allow themselves to be treated that way because they have this fundamental core belief. They identify with that, but it's a false identity. Um, but the flip side, as Christians, this is what we're called to do, to not just say it with our head, but to truly believe it. I am a son or a daughter of God. And that will, as we continue to act accordingly, then our belief will change with that. There's a great example. It's a book I'm reading. It's called Atomic Habits, I think it is, by James Clear,
Atomic
something like that.
Habits, yeah.
Atomic Habits.
Wig. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a very good book, and I think he's not necessarily purposefully so, but he's talking about like false identities or identities. Like we can change how we act, thus what we believe ourselves, just by taking small improvements in our life.
Uh-huh.
Little by little, right? And that like we could say, okay, I understand that I really don't see myself as a son or daughter of God, right? We can conceptually get that, but how do I actually change that? Well, we start acting in a manner of what we believe a son or daughter would do. We can just even start those smaller steps. Okay, I'm going to stop cussing. It's something I really got to work on. So we start taking smaller steps. And then overall, he just talks about those 1% incremental changes, like over a period of time, like we really end up just living out what it is we believe, if that makes sense. So that's the difference. Like we can change we can change our identity. That's what I would say. When I was in the military, it was really nice to be able to be PCS, permanent change of station. You were in the military. When we moved, sometimes we talk about like, oh, it's good. I look forward to changing my identity because I was this person was like so siloed. Like they saw me as this way, but I had so much more to offer. So it was really nice to be able to move so I could change my identity, like act in a different way to reinvent myself, as they say.
Boy, I hope nobody makes a soundbite of that. Like
Yeah,
a Melchite priest that says, I
uh,
believe you can change your identity.
yeah.
Um,
Take it in context. Take it in
yeah,
context.
exactly.
Mhm.
Exactly. Yeah, but there is an aspect that we actually do need to change. Like you're saying, we have experiences in life that then we can create a false belief about ourselves. Maybe I'm incompetent or I'm unworthy or I'm unloved or I'm, worthless.
Mhm.
And those aren't the way they don't correspond with what God sees in us and the way that God has made us. And so that if we can realign what we believe about ourselves with the truth, then we can get to a greater fulfillment. So I'm trying to distinguish, like, when you get a change of state of duty station, you're actually aligning with the truth. You're changing your identity, but you're keeping it in line with the truth of who you are, right? So if you wouldn't say you still live, where did you live before Dallas?
Last time was Steubenville, Ohio. Yeah.
Yeah, so like if you were to continue to say you live in Steubenville while living in Dallas, that would be a false identity, right? Or
Yes.
a part.
Well, in the way I am defining it, and actually, again, I did take a good part of this from that book, Atomic Habits. Identity, and I was also looking at, just as I do research on identity and the person identified, the way it's often thought of is what you believe about yourself. Like that's
Yeah,
kind of what I'm getting at. But we can have false beliefs,
yeah,
and that's kind of the crux it. Like in that sense, we can change our identity and must necessarily do so when we have a false belief about ourselves. God can never love me, therefore I am unlovable. That's a false belief, and I am inclined to say you're going to live and act according to that false belief. The way you carry yourself, the way you talk to other people, the way you talk to yourself, and those thoughts that you have about yourself, constantly putting yourself down. I'm saying like you can change that. I believe it, right? And that's the false thing that you have identified with.
yeah, absolutely. Um, do you think you could give some more examples about that? About like I think you had one of a smoker, like when a smoker's trying to quit
Oh,
smoking or something, like
yeah. That's a good example. We are talking. Yeah. Um, you can have two smokers. Is my example, and they're both trying to quit. And let's just say they both for 2 weeks now have not smoked at all. And you can have a person come, like their old friend, like who's familiar with them smoking, and offer each one a cigarette. Now the one can say, "No thanks, I'm trying to quit." And in their mind, it's because I'm still a smoker and I want to quit. The other person who hasn't smoked in 2 weeks say, "No thanks, I'm not a smoker." They've
Mm.
changed their fundamental identity of who they are. I am no longer a smoker, which is very different. Like, I'm trying to quit, because that person is identifying with still being a smoker, right? So again, it's this thought pattern. As we, as far as counselors, we want to identify those thought patterns that they have about themselves. Give me, sometimes I do this. Give me a word or a phrase that sums up who you are. Like, if it's good, like, okay, there's truth in that. If it's, what you really believe, not the answer you think you should give, right? And if they can be honest with that, then we can say, okay, they have a false identity. Like, are you the smoker, or are you just someone who's trying to quit? Are you someone who still believes you're worthless, or do you actually think I'm worth? Like, I know I shouldn't believe I'm worthless. Okay, you're telling me you still believe that, versus no, I believe I am loved. That's completely different.
Mm. Yeah, this is very important, huh?
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, I do. I believe that.
Yeah, yeah. Um, how do people discover more deeply the truth of who they are?
I would say look at your actions. Of course, prayer and reflection, but like who you are comes out in what you do.
Mhm.
That makes sense. The phrase my mom used to say growing up all the time, when you're like, you just punched your brother or punch, it's just like, I'm sorry. Like, but you keep saying you're sorry. Actions speak louder than words is the phrase that was said a lot in my home. And
Mhm.
that I think can really help us identify what we really believe is our identity, right? So if we're someone who struggles with pornography and we want to quit, and that's good, we do that. But like, are your actions regularly taking you towards pornography or away from it, right? If that makes sense. Like, what is
Mhm.
my true identity? Like, hey, I don't want to do this. It's important to me when I talk with people who struggle with things such as that. It's like, hey, are you actually finding freedom, or are you white knuckling it? Right? I'm holding on so tight, and
Mhm.
I can fight my way through this. But to me, that doesn't really. You're still holding on to identity. No, like you are chased. Let's look at your actions over the last week. Let's just say. Let's focus on the good. Let's focus on the holy. What have you done? Just like, okay, I put my computer away. I prayed more. I was chased with my girlfriend or something like that when we've been struggling. Okay,
Mhm.
like your actions are reflecting your identity right now. And that's what we want to keep doing, right? Is a reflection of who you are. Because we can tell ourselves something, but again, it really comes out in our actions. Yeah. Um, yeah. And again, our actions will tell us what we really believe. Like, I actually don't think I can get over this. That's why I keep turning back to sin. Well, okay, now we need to talk about that, because you actually can. We believe in grace. We believe in goodness there.
Mhm. Yeah, so if somebody finds that there's a dichotomy or like a disconnect between what they're doing and what they're saying, like, oh yeah, I'm made in the image of God, and I'm a, I don't know, very practicing Catholic. But then obviously we all have areas of sin, but there's something that's not in accordance with that. Um, what do they do to bridge the gap? How do you, yeah,
Oh yeah, okay. So if I understand your question correctly, like we all have areas. We're all constantly going to be working on it, right? And
yeah.
so, but the image of God is we are still loved. When we start to focus on our sin, so it's important. Let's identify those areas in our life that we want to improve. And I like that language. I want to versus oh I have to. Well, I mean, yes and no. Do you have to? If we're made in the image of God, you have the choice not to. So why are we talking have to? The question is, do you actually want to? And that's one of the big things that I struggle with, or that I talk with people who are struggling with particular sexual sins.
Mhm.
There's various ones. I say the first thing we need to identify is, do you actually really want to change? Or is it just a matter of guilt that you feel like you have to? Because unless the person actually wants to, we're not going to get very far. I mean,
Mm.
that's just kind of my approach to it, right? Unless you have a true desire to change. Um, so identifying those things like, hey, what is it I want to do? And then you just work. You said, how do we bridge those gaps? Well, we recognize, okay, I am loved. This is not who I was created to be, and I'm working on it. right? And that's what this veil of tears is. It's a constant working on it. There's a saying, an atheist went, Mount Athos, for those, I don't know if anybody knows it, Mount Athos is known as the Holy Mountain in the East. It's where a lot of monastics go and devote their lives to God. And you had an atheist come there one time and was kind of like scoffing at them. It's a waste of your life. He says, "What is it that you do all day, Abuna," which means father? "What is it you do?" Scoffing at him. He said, "Well, we fall down, but then we get up. And we fall down, and then we get up, and then we fall down again, but we get up again. The important thing is that we're getting up." Right? So that's our life. And that's where we take our hope, right? That's where we believe in God's mercy.
That is beautiful. That is really beautiful. Oftentimes when I'm working with couples, I'll like remind them everybody has arguments or discussions, right? That are maybe heated sometimes. But it's not so much about not having arguments because they're going to happen, moments of disagreement. It's like, how do I reconcile after that? How do I
Mm.
how do I repair when I've made a mistake or when I've said something that I was heated?
Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah.
Yeah. So, oh, was there a question? So that was,
No, no, that was just a
okay.
reflection.
Just, okay. All right. Very good.
Yeah. Well, did you want to expand on any more examples of, we talked about false core beliefs. Are
Mhm.
there any other examples that we might be referring to when we're talking about difficulties with identity or difficulties of knowing you're made in the image of God?
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. Sometimes there people can fall into like a sense of entitlement. Like, you owe it to me. I deserve whatever. Like, I deserve it.
Mhm.
And I would say, that is also a false understanding of what it means. Like, made in the image of God, so therefore you should give me everything. But again, as Christians, as Catholics,
I
we look
am
at the,
God,
yeah, yeah, yeah,
right?
pretty much. That's it. Like, I am God, you give me everything. But we look at the example of God,
Yeah.
insofar as the incarnate God who washed the feet of the apostles, who gave his life for the life of the world. Right? I mean, that is truly the image of God, that we are living that out most perfectly when we're living out the way that Christ did. Right? So the sense of the now, I deserve respect. When we talk with those couples who are like abused, like, and like they're afraid to leave this relationship, it's like it's a different thing. It's not an entitlement to say I deserve respect, right? It's not to say you are made in the image of God and you deserve more. So let's look at your dignity. But when we start to trample on the dignity of others by saying, "Hey, you sacrifice always for me," that would be an example of not living. That could agitate the problem, if you will, of not living in the image of God. And then, as I mentioned earlier, um, an incorrect view of the image of God is we start to say, "If I feel it, therefore it must be so." Again, sexual confusion. Uh, I feel like I'm a woman in a guy's body. I go with this notion of love is love. Love is a feeling. God is love. Therefore, as long as it's loving, it's okay. And that's something I think a lot of parents struggle with. I mean, like, if their child, is that, and it's just like, wow, I love my child and I don't want them to do these things. Um, but it's getting down to that understanding of like love isn't a feeling, right? Love is always the truth. Now, how we present that truth is very different, but it's not a feeling. Uh, they could say like God doesn't care. I've heard this, God doesn't care if I love a man or if I'm a man. He doesn't care if I love another man. And acts, it's more detailed than that, but you can understand like, and I'm acting on what I would say in a holy manner, like, but God does care, right? We can't confuse love with a feeling. So anyway, that's where a lot of confusion comes in, is when we start identifying the truth with feelings. Like, I feel this way, therefore it must be true. Um, sorry, I could keep talk about other things if you want, but I'll let you ask the next question, then we can let other people ask questions if they have them.
Sure. Yeah, we're almost to that time. Well, is there any specific guidance that you would like to offer? Um, if there are not very many questions, we can go into this more. But is there anything in particular that you really recommend when somebody's struggling with seeing themselves in the image of God
Mm,
and aligned with the truth of who they really are before Him? What would you
yeah,
recommend?
yeah, yeah. I would say they first have to look within themselves. I was speaking with a person with this yesterday. about this with a person yesterday, and it does come up sometimes with clients. They will often look for validation for someone outside of themselves. If my parents, whom I didn't get along with, growing up, I always wanted to please them, right? And there are reasons we grow up, defense mechanisms acting in a certain way. But when we grow up and we get to a certain point of our life, when we keep acting like that, like, hey, I can't voice my concerns. I can't, I just can't, I can't handle it when people get angry with me. So therefore, I become this unhealthy people pleaser. Well, what's happening is you're looking for validation from someone outside yourself. So as long as they're happy, I can be happy. As long as they're upset, then I can be at peace. And that's not good, right? That is a, I would say that would be confusion with your identity as a person, or understanding the image and likeness of God. So just broadly speaking, we have to understand, if we want to get better from that, if we want to be healed from those tendencies, if we have them. OCD and scrupulosity is fits right in with this. We're looking for an external source to be like, okay, you've done that perfectly, now you can go on. But we stop looking because we don't trust ourselves, because I just can't trust what's going on in me, because I'm dumb, I'm an idiot, or whatever. That's what we need to work on, because you were created in the image of light and likeness of God. You have it by God's grace. You have it within you to understand who you are in that, and you don't need it from others.
Yeah, it's just like so much the summary of what counseling work is. So,
Yeah,
so
yeah,
much.
yeah.
Yeah. Well, given the time, it's 12:36. We want to open up for any questions. I did not have a chance to look at the questions that were submitted. So if anybody has a question, just go ahead and place it in the chat. And we will attend to those as they come in. For the meantime, let me ask you another question, Father Peter. How does counseling help? So spiritual direction could definitely help, right?
Mhm.
Discovering your identity and in the image of God. But how would counseling help?
With understanding identity, I
Mhm.
yeah, I think it goes back to what I was saying earlier about, at least my experience when I'm talking with people, they identify so much reality with their emotions or their feelings, and
Mhm.
it's very difficult for them to distinguish. I'll just call it emotional maturity, but that's not like a derogatory, like, oh, they don't, they're immature. But like, but I do think, like, a healthy understanding of emotions can block uh, correct thinking, cognitive thinking, if that makes sense,
Mhm.
right? And so, and helping a person, depending on where they're at in their life, to understanding, like, hey, that's how you feel, but how realistic is that? How rational is that? And I will often ask those questions, and they'll sometimes, they'll start smiling. Okay, I get it. It's not very rational, but then I'll put it back on them. But okay, but you do feel that way, correct? Yes. Okay, so we don't have to beat ourselves up for those feelings. Feelings are feelings. They can change on a whim, and feelings
Mhm.
are good. Emotions were given to us by God, and we can start to work on controlling feelings. But this is where, again, made in the image of God, that the cognitive power that the human person was given, again, is different from the animals. So let's approach this more from a rational perspective. They say the biggest distance, the longest distance, is between the head and the heart. You know, so again, it depends on where the person is at. Are they, because you can have people who are too cognitive, and they're afraid to let their emotions. So it's a both and. It's always finding that balance of being the person that God has created us to be.
That's really interesting. You just brought that up. So some people can be like too cognitive. Could you talk a little more about that?
Oh, sure, yeah. Like, hey, I'll use a generic example, but a lot of this is based on reality.
Mhm.
If I'm working with couples counseling, right, and typically, not always, but typically, the woman tends to be more emotional, and the guy tends to be more cognitive, and it's striking that balance. Um, like, the guy can be like, "Oh, she always wants to feel, and it's just not rational," and he departs the lived experience. Like, my child just fell, and they're crying, and the mom wants to run. That's a beautiful run to the child, the baby, and pick him up. That's a good thing. The dad, meanwhile, can be like, his leg's not broken, let him be. And that's where we need to have this balance. Like, yeah, he's not going to die. The child's not going to die, but emotions, that maternal care in the midst of when they're hurting, like, we need to let our emotions shape some of our actions. That's important. So that's an example. Like, you're too cognitive. I mean, it's kind of funny. It can certainly get to be more than that, but like, Hey, he'll be okay. Men don't cry, that type of thing. That's too cognitive. Like you're always in your head. Like I essentially a man shouldn't feel emotions. You know, we
Mm.
just break things and kill people or whatever. Like that was kind of a military thing, and it was really, to
Yeah, men don't have emotions. What are you doing crying?
yeah, that's right. Yeah, yeah. I didn't give you permission to cry. Suck it up. Yeah, but that was, within the
My
military
hands just
context.
automatically went into fists.
And you sat at attention as well. That's right. Good job, Liz. We can pull this back here. I want to see you march. But that is a thing like the military had to do in many ways. Like if you're in that, if that's your profession, we'll say, really to kind of devote, separate the emotional and really do the rational thing like that was purposely done, right? So that in the heat of the battle, your emotions don't overtake you and you can still act according to them. But that causes problems. That
Yeah.
causes a lot of problems in relationships, especially in wartime, and people are, deployed and then they come back and they have to integrate into this loving, God willing, a loving home with a spouse, with children, and they just can't, right? I mean, but again, that can be a cognitive things and teaching them like emotions are okay. You saw horrible things, right? I can cry with you on this. Like that's where the emotions become very healing. So I feel like I took that in a different direction, but hopefully people can understand when I say too cognitive, we can stay too much in our heads.
Yeah, I definitely think you did a great job explaining. For the longest time I was looking for a reputable source who would speak about the value of emotions and the emotional life. And then I stumbled on Conrad Barr's work. Um,
Mm,
and he's excellent. His daughter now I think has in his image counseling and does a great job explaining. But there is value. Like God would not have created us with emotions if they weren't valuable, right? And
yeah,
some of us over rationalize or like we suppress those emotions and then they come out in a sideways way.
yeah,
So yeah,
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 yeah. You're
that's
right.
well. I did get some questions. Our
Yeah.
background work sent me some questions, and then we have a few people typing in the chat. So let's answer the ones in the chat first. So someone asked, as Christians, how would we overcome um, feelings of LGBT?
Okay.
How would we work on that?
Yeah. That's one I find that honestly is a very beautiful topic, right? Because I would say that the church didn't handle it very well when when it became such a pronounced thing in society, right? And lots of yeah, there's political stuff behind that, but the church recognizes that now, right? Love heals all things. How does one overcome how they feel, or how does one overcome a particular attraction? I have not done great extensive work in this myself, so I want to
Mhm.
give that disclaimer. But I would say my initial thoughts is when we say overcome, what do we mean? Like, I don't want to have these feelings anymore. I'm not always sure that we can stop our feelings. I mean, they can be so. Now we can work towards that, right? Like if I had a brother priest of mine, he said that he had to get better because he was so connected to the people when he would visit them in the hospitals. He was like an emotional wreck because he would cry because he felt their pain. And
Mhm.
he said I had to, for his word, like I had to overcome that. Like I was a mess. It wasn't very good, especially if my ministry is doing these things. But like it's not saying you don't have those feelings anymore. It's how much we allow them to control us. Right.
Mhm.
So if someone is gay, if they're, the thing is like, okay, I acknowledge that I have a I'm talking about a guy. I acknowledge that I have these feelings towards a guy, right? And we say, but as a Christian, how do I do this? Well, we acknowledge it. I don't think burying it is ever helpful, right? We can have shame and embarrassment. It happens to people at puberty too, by the way. When I talk with some people who went through puberty without the homosexual feelings, like as a woman, like I'm just feeling these things, and then there's the shame that's attached with them, and that can cause emotional immaturity or harm, even when they're adults, right? So that's why I say, okay, well, we first need to understand what the feelings are. Let's stop trying to deny that they're there. Let's bring those up, right? Because again, emotions, some feelings are feelings. It's how we act upon that. That's what I was saying with the identity. What do we believe? We want to know it's how we act, right? So if I act in a holy manner, in a chaste manner, and I'm acting in such a way that is respectful. Again, if I'm a guy, if I'm respecting other guys, and I still have that attraction, well, I need to know, I have to be more guarded. on situations I'll put myself into, but I can live a very fruitful life. I can live a very holy life. And so to me, I'm like, um, when you say, oh, overcoming maybe these feelings, like, well, the feelings might be there, but we don't have to be defined by society that says act on those feelings. So I can overcome those inclinations. I would like to say it like that. We can overcome those inclinations purely by just living as a son or a daughter of God, which which isn't easy. And I'm not saying this is easy,
Yeah.
but that's how that's done. And in that you are sanctified, you are made holy. The Holy Spirit comes and dwells in you because He knows your heart. I hope that
Mhm.
answers whoever asked it. I hope that it was at least helpful. So we
Yeah.
don't necessarily have to get rid of the feelings, is what I'm saying. That's not like a requirement. Um,
Mhm. No, I think you answered excellently. And I think I would emphasize that community is really important in order to be able to,
mm,
right? Because we're all made for communion. We're all made for um, to be accompanied by others, and so finding a community that also supports you in your goals, right? Like if I want to live a chaste life according to the teachings of the church, then I need to
yeah,
find other ways to connect with people that are healthy, you know?
yeah. I'll throw
Yeah.
this out here. If no one's seen this TED Talk, this is I came across this and they even showed this when I was doing some work in substance abuse with people who were court ordered, so they didn't always want to be there. There's a wonderful talk on addictions. Everything you thought about addictions is wrong by Johan Hari, Hari. Google
Hmm,
that. I mean, it was more focused on drugs, but I think it's very applicable to many areas in our life. It's a great TED Talk.
cool. Thanks for that recommendation.
So,
Someone else asked, how do we work through overthinking and bring God into that space?
mhm. It's a great question. This is my approach with that when people, particularly when they ruminate or when we have scrupulosity. And this is an approach I have. In many ways, again, the overthinking and all that, it's this endless cycle. I like to say the self-licking ice cream cone, right? It doesn't get you anywhere, and it's just kind of eating you up inside. Where is the resolution? So it's identifying. It is identifying like this does not help, right? Because what we think is like there's a reason we do stuff. The mind validates what it already believes. If I keep thinking about this, eventually I'm going to get the answer. I mean, that's just it. We do our actions. We start them habits because they serve some purpose at some point. We have to break that habit, and this is where like reason, comes into play. Like, and I will sit with them. Okay, tell me what are you getting out of this action? And they'll say nothing. I mean, that's kind of the answer. I'm like, but no, you are getting something out of it. Otherwise, it wouldn't be happening. So if we can identify that, then I mean, so again, generic. It's individual dependent. But then I like that. How do we bring God into that space? One of the beautiful things about being finite humans is that we can't really think two things at once. We can say I'm thinking a million things at once, but really what's happening it's rapid fire. But if we were to take any microsecond snapshot on there, there's actually only one thought that we can have going on. So, for example, if I say think about chocolate ice cream and ice cream and vanilla ice cream, we can only sequentially. That's our limitation. So, how do we bring God into that space? It really is saying, I must stop thinking about this and I think about God. Like it really is effort on our part, right? So we have, and we build habits, and habits are known as habits because they have a strength to them. So I'm used to overthinking about this topic, and I go every single, boom, 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 boom. Well, at those moments when you're thinking about that, you are not thinking about God. I mean, just because we can't. We can have a sense of His presence. We can say, I was prayerfully thinking. All those things are valid. But when we're having these thoughts of just overthinking in this particular thing, and boom, 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 we keep going. Like, well, how we bring God into that space is we literally stop, and it's not easy. But the more we bring God and we start thinking about God, or even just a better thought, a holy thought, that creates a different kind of habit. I am used to thinking about this. And here is very scriptural, I think. The demons that were cast out of the woman came back and it was swept, the demon, and it came back and it was swept clean. So, okay, it's cleaned up. So I'm going to go get seven other demons and then kind of inhabit this. The problem, this is me saying this, the problem was it was swept clean and it was empty, meaning it's an invitation for anything to come back. right? So it's not that we want to just fight about these thoughts, like push it out, push it out. I mean, while that is good, it must be replaced with something. Like something must be existing there. And that's where I'm again, so we can talk more about that specifically, but generally speaking, we have to stop those thoughts. I would love to do that, but it has to be replaced with another thought. And that's where those habits get stronger.
That was a great example. Thanks so much. Yeah.
Mm.
Boy, I could just keep going on that, but let's go on to one more question.
Okay.
Um, what do I do when I can't stop negative self-talk?
Mm. That's essentially those are habits, right? It's essentially what I was saying there. Like we have this habit, and then when we repeat these habit, which is an action, we believe like our beliefs. It works both ways. We believe something, then our actions reflect that. When we're acting in such a way, we eventually start to believe it. I mean, it can be one of both ways, right? So the negative self-talk is we have to challenge that. We have to identify things that we truly do recognize as gifts from God, right? No one, it goes back to the very first thing we talked about. No one was created bad. We all have some goodness in us. We have to because God created us. So we pick those few things, even if our mind is very in a dark place. We really don't see a lot of good qualities. How could anybody love me? How could God love me? It really is important to pick a couple of things, really, and identify those good things. And we make that our habit to think about. And one of the biggest things, and the saints would talk about this, that's where pray, thanksgiving, thanking God for the gifts, like that's what defeats a lot of this negative thinking, right? Because again, with negative thinking, we turn in on ourselves. Woe is me, poor me, I'm a worm, I'm dust. And those things can be true, but when we say, God, you are beautiful and you made me in your image, you made me in your likeness, you'll just like people can even just sit up straighter. It's because they've just come out of themselves, if that makes sense. So it's really to get external and start thanking God and being more praised. So those are some actually valid techniques, but especially as Christians, that's how we start combating the evil one in the darkness that wants to overtake us in our lives.
What is one closing thought you'd like to leave us with?
One, we always have to have hope. Christians are a people of hope. The last few popes, I'm not so sure about. I haven't heard him. Not that he hasn't said this. Pope Leo hasn't necessarily talked a lot about this, but like from John Paul II, Benedict, and Francis were just regularly talking about like Christians must be a people of joy. But joy is rooted in hope. What am I joyful about? I'm hopeful. I'm hopeful that this life isn't all there is. I am hopeful and I believe in that Christ loves me. So how do we get hope? That would be like my big thing, is to hold on to hope. Look for things like I really do believe this life, even if my life is miserable right now, I do hope that things will get better, even if not in this life, because that's what Christ came and that was the message he preached. We always have to be a people of hope. I mean, that's the big mantra.
I love it. Thank you for joining. Thank you for being here today.
Of course.
Yeah. So I want to thank everyone for participating, for joining us today for this wonderful moment of sharing. If you'd like to contact Father Peter, we've placed his information in the chat. We'd also like you to leave us a review in Yelp. And a recording of this session will be sent out via email within the next week or so. Thank you again for joining us, and we look forward to supporting you on your journey to joy.